What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Broaden Your Perspective podcast. This is going to be a solo episode. I'm going to sit down and just chat with you guys, and this is going to be a sequel to my pilot episode titled Who is Jonny Hsu? About a year and a half has passed since I first decided to launch the podcast, and I wanted to check in with the listeners and give updates throughout what's been going on in my life. New things that I've learned, how my interests and perspective on things have changed since I first started the podcast. So to start things off, I decided to take the podcast with a different theme. That's why I've decided to go ahead and design a new logo to, be a sign of a new start, I guess. I don't know if you guys have noticed it by listening to in the past 10 episodes or so, but previously the Broaden Your Perspective podcast was just a platform where different people who are all on different stages of their own journeys could come and share their story. I would ask very general questions about topics like life advice, productivity hacks, getting motivated, and stuff like that. It was more so in the personal development category, I want to say, but I found this to be way too broad in general, and I wanted to find my own niche given my interests and environment. So one thing I constantly refer to in the podcast is about how finding your passion and interests is like trying different foods. You can't say your favorite food is sushi if that's the only thing you've ever eaten in your life. You never know what you might end up liking if you try out different foods. It's the same with finding your passion. You've got to try different things. A lot of listeners listening to the podcast might think, well, Jonny, you know what you're doing with your life and you've already kind of figured out what you're passionate about. That's good. Well, I have no idea what my passions are. I have a few interests, but I don't think I've yet to turn them into passions that I used to enjoy a ton in the past, like video games and basketball. So here's the new theme I'm going with in the podcast. Follow along with me as I try to figure out my life. I'll invite different guests on the show who are doing cool things and keep the episode much more specific and tailored to their situation rather than asking general broad questions. So these will be guests that I meet, along my journey of being an undergraduate student, going on exchange, and all these different co-op experiences that I've been on. For example, the recent episode I just posted with my friend Neil, he's got experience working in medical devices and heart valves. So that entire episode was focused on his internship experiences working in medical devices. And he also talks about the different types of heart valves and the projects that he's worked on. So I asked much more specific and tailored questions to his situation rather than, asking general questions that I would ask to any other guest. The same thing with one of my previous guests, Ellen. She took a gap year coming out of high school, so I asked her about her experience with that since I thought a lot of the graduating high school seniors that are about to graduate will have to make a decision on whether or not they want to take a gap year. Hopefully, Ellen's experience will give them some insight into what you can do in your gap year. She talks about her experiences, what she found was a value of taking a gap year, and maybe that might help influence your decision. Ellen also worked in fintech consulting at a startup, so we talk about what it's like doing that as well. And the idea is this: I am equally as confused or unaware with what I want to do with my life and where my interests and passions lie. So as I embark on this journey of finding those things and meeting new people, you guys can sort of follow along. Referring back to the food and passion analogy, if finding your passion is like trying different foods, then I want this podcast to be the menu to show you what's possible out there and bring in guests that can speak to what they're doing. Hopefully, as fellow students out there also trying to figure out their passions, they can listen to some of the stories from the guests and spark an interest in a specific field, right? For myself, coming out of high school, I didn't even know what mechanical engineering was. I didn't know that the medical device industry even existed, and that was something I could base my career in and spend my life, designing medical devices like heart valves to save people's lives. I also didn't really know about consulting, let alone what fintech was. Referring back to Neil and Ellen's episodes, hopefully for the students out there listening, they can learn about something that the guests share, which will spark their interest in trying to pursue that specific thing later down the line. The coolest thing for me as a podcast host would be somebody who listened, for example, the episode I had with Neil and reached out to me a few years later saying, hey, I'm currently, a manager at Medtronic working on heart valves. My journey in the medical device industry started when I listened to the episode you had with Neil. From there, my interest in medical devices was born, and it's been super fun ever since then. That's the goal. That's what I'm trying to do with the podcast now. You can expect much more specific and tailored episodes to each of the respective guests according to their experiences and their journeys. I encourage you to approach each episode with an open mind, and maybe you'll learn something new. On to the year recap now. All right, so this episode is being recorded a few days after my birthday. I'm turning 21 this year, and it's been a roller coaster of a year. So I thought it would be fitting to create a Who is Jonny Hsu kind of like a part 2, because it has been like a year and a half now since I first started the podcast. Last year this time, I had just wrapped up my first co-op term working at the Bank of Montreal. It was 4 months of pure growth. I worked with an amazing team, and I had a wonderful manager who empowered me to go above and beyond expectations, to take ownership of my projects. And moreover, this was the first time I was ever truly living by myself. I wasn't working out of their downtown office, but I was in Scarborough, which is a suburb outside of the main Toronto city area. And so I lived, in a quiet neighborhood, and the only problem is that it was nowhere near any of my friends. And, I learned to be alone, and I learned how to be okay with my own thoughts and be in peace and quiet. It also gave me the time I needed to do some serious self-reflection and thinking about life. At the end of the day, was it the most fun term? No, but did I grow from it? Absolutely. I apologize if I'm sounding a little bit stuffy here. It's just I haven't been in Vancouver for this long since probably high school around this time. Because of the entire coronavirus situation, everybody is, stuck at home now. Everything's online. So I'm just, relaxing at home and spending a lot of time with my family. But the Vancouver allergies always get me. And so, my nose is just like super stuffy right now. But anyways, after finishing that first co-op term at BMO, flash forward to the end of the term, it was hectic. I always return back home to, beautiful British Columbia whenever I can in between terms. And at most, I have a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks to just relax and chill at home with my family before the next semester starts. And so as a result, I'm always overestimating my ability to pack up all my stuff and move before I catch a flight back. So in one day, I moved out of my place in Scarborough, had a friend help me move all of my stuff back to Waterloo, which was almost a 2-hour drive, moved back into my apartment in Waterloo, pack my bags, and then catch a flight back home to Vancouver, which, by the way, from Waterloo to Toronto Pearson International Airport, that's like another hour and a half, 2-hour drive, depending on traffic. So that was the start of a super busy summer break. I arrived home exhausted, never having the chance to catch my breath from wrapping up my co-op term and moving and all that stuff. But I didn't get a chance to rest just yet because at the time, I was the president of the Enactus Waterloo chapter. And Enactus is a community of entrepreneurs who sees social entrepreneurship as a way of creating impact in the community. And so the point of the club is to create social ventures, measure the impact you've been able to have in the community through whatever workshops you ran, and then create presentations to compete against the other Enactus chapters not only across Canada, but also across the world. And so they host these regional and national competitions every year. And it just so happened that the Enactus National Competitions was happening in Vancouver. So I housed pretty much the entire team that came over while we were busy scrambling together to put together the presentation, right? A few of my friends from Ontario, we started the club together, we ran it together, and then so it was a great chance to bond with my buddies even more, and they all just came down to Vancouver and hung out at my place. And so even when we finished, the presentations, which was hectic, that kind of ran throughout the week of my birthday. I spent the last few days showing my friends around the city. And, moreover, I had just found out that I was going to Shenzhen and Hong Kong for the Startup Immersion program. So I had to make sure all my visa documents were in place. So here I was running around preparing for Enactus national presentations, trying to be the best host that I can to my friends that came to visit in Vancouver, and also trying to get all these visa documents in place so I'm prepared to go on my trip. So it was a hectic week and a half, 2 weeks. And then less than 2 weeks after landing in Waterloo, I found myself awake at 5 a.m. at Pearson International Airport, about to board and catch a 16-hour flight to Hong Kong. And I've already talked a lot about my experience at the Startup Immersion program. I've had a few guests on the podcast who I met through this program, and I even wrote a huge article about this on LinkedIn. So I won't get into much more detail about my experience with the program, but it was an amazing 2 weeks, and it was filled with nothing but great memories and experiences with the coolest group of people ever. Ellen, who was just recently on, I don't remember the exact episode number, but she was on the podcast for an episode. I have my really good friend Jack from Australia, who's working on really good things with his company, Generation Entrepreneur. He has, he's been on the show. We've talked before. I just haven't had a chance to edit and release the episode yet, but that one is coming. Anyways, great experience. Coming back from that trip, I had missed 3 weeks of school, and I was about to miss a few more days due to jet lag. And so from that point on, I was just playing catch up, right? And nevertheless, my summer term was still great. It was pretty much the last semester I would spend living with my best friends, as we were about to be off stream from one another, meaning I was about to go for a co-op term in the fall semester, but they all had another school term lined up. And so we would always be alternating from that point on. I would be on a co-op term, and they would be in school, and we just flip-flop. So we wouldn't get a chance to be, in the same Waterloo community at the same time for, who knows how long and what happens to our sequencing. And, the summer term was great. But we had a good time. I even joined a softball intramural team at school, something I never thought I would ever do. But throughout that summer, I was really lucky to find a job at CIBC as a consultant. This time, it was in their downtown location. And so one of my other best friends, who I was also living with in Waterloo, there's a group of 5 of us, including myself. 3 of them had to stay in school, and another one of my friends who was studying actuarial sciences was also doing a co-op term in the fall. And so he was going to be working downtown as well. So we got a place together downtown, and then, moving into the term, I did not know what to expect at all. And so I had a very relaxing 2-week break spent back home in Vancouver before September rolled around, and I had to move into my new place, in the heart of downtown. And this place wasn't the best, nor was it the biggest, but it was one of the best locations you could possibly ask for. So I think the room was 1 bedroom and 1 den. So my buddy, he had the master bedroom, I had the den. And so, it was like the den was like the small room, livable, just had a sliding door, and that was it. The amenities in the building was great. If you guys are from Toronto, we stayed at the Maple Leaf Square condos. So they had amazing amenities. It was attached. We didn't even have to step outside to get into Scotiabank Arena. We can just go through the pathway from our condos to the Scotiabank Arena. We did actually watch a Raptors game one time during that term. It was super fun. But they had an amazing swimming pool, amazing gym. They've got business offices, so great amenities. It was also an amazing location because we both live like a 10 to 15 minute walk away from work. And so, the first week got settled in, everything was great. And then that first weekend, I actually went over to Montreal for a kickoff getaway with the team at Front Row Ventures. And so, throughout the summer, we had been going through training, but now we were about to start looking at companies and making investment decisions. So the team is a very diverse team, right? There are your traditional business students, but I would say majority of the team is composed of, like, for example, myself, I'm from the sciences. We got math students, computer sciences, engineering students. So that first summer was just all about, getting everybody up to speed on what is venture capital and learning some of the business things behind that. But yeah, throughout the summer, we've been going through training, and in the fall, this is when we're going to start, making our mark in the ecosystem. So this retreat in Montreal was a 4-day trip combining both the Ontario and the Quebec team together. It was a full long weekend. We rented Airbnbs. We stayed in the city for a few days. We went out to this beautiful campsite for our last night there, and I made a ton of friends and bonded with some of the other members on the team. So that was an amazing experience and super fun as well. But, my co-op experience in the fall was such a huge contrast to how things were last winter. And it's not so much about the actual job, but it's also about the environment where I was living in, right? Now I was living downtown Toronto with one of my best friends, right in the heart of the city. It's bustling, it's super fun. Co-op term was equally as amazing at CIBC, but I want to say it all started with basketball again. So a few of my friends from Vancouver, they go to school at the University of Toronto, which was like a 10-minute subway ride away from my new place. And one of my good friends, Ivan Gia, check it out, episode 20, he joined me for an episode on the podcast. He studies at University of Toronto, and he asked me if I wanted to meet up and play some pickup basketball at the school gym. And what's crazy about the gym is that to get in, you need to swipe your University of Toronto student card to get through. They had this like little gate that was being supervised by the front office. And I was shocked when I first saw this, because in Waterloo, we don't have any of that. You could literally be walking around campus, not even being a student, and go access our gym and fitness facilities. And so, funny story, over the summer, one time I even saw Jamal Murray of the Denver Nuggets playing pickup at our gym. But his hometown, he's from Kitchener, Ontario. But anyways, back on track, Ivan had borrowed a card from his buddies and swiped me in that one time. And so throughout the pickup game, I had the chance to reconnect with one of my old-time friends who I used to play soccer with back in, grade 8, 9, and 10. This is my guy, Will Kim. Shout out to him if he's listening. But we hit it off right away, talking about old memories, and started consistently playing ball and just working out together. So, before I got into basketball, which was probably the latter half of high school, I played soccer growing up my whole life. And so, yeah, we were on the same soccer team. Anyways, he introduced me to the intramural basketball team he was playing with, and they let me join the team even though I wasn't a student at the University of Toronto. I made a ton of friends on that team, most notably one of my good friends, Brady Leung. If he's listening, shout out to him as well. He's going to be joining me for an episode on the podcast once he gets back home to Vancouver. It's something that we're scheduled up and it's in the works. And so through Will, Brady, Ivan, and basketball, I was introduced to a huge group of friends to not only play basketball with, but, just to hang out too. And so, serendipitously at the same time, I ran into one of my old high school friends who was 2-3 years older than me and just graduated from University of Toronto. The same story happened here. He let me join his intramural basketball team at U of T and also let me join his men's league team. So now I found myself playing for pretty much 4 different basketball teams. And yes, every time I had to get into the gym or use the fitness facilities at the school, I needed a friend to bring me an extra T card. That's what they called it. The University of Toronto student card was called a T card. So I needed a friend to bring me an extra T card so I could get swiped in. It was crazy. And, this borrowing a card to swipe into the gym situation got really interesting when both of the intramural teams I was on made it deeper into the playoffs. And so at this point, the referees were starting to check the card with the actual player before the games. The 2 teams I was on also never faced each other because they were part of a different division. But I had a game in the finals with the team that had a bunch of my friends from Vancouver, and we ended up winning that, and I got a University of Toronto intramural champion t-shirt, which I have to this day. And funny enough, if you go into the University of Toronto intramural basketball page, you'll see a picture of me on there. Probably the only University of Waterloo student ever on that page. But the next day was the semifinals for my other team, and sure enough, it was the same ref from yesterday that I had just played in the finals. So we had some debate back and forth with our coach to see, maybe I'll wear a headband and it could act as like a disguise for me. I don't know what we were thinking, but we decided it wasn't worth the risk of them finding out that I play for 2 teams, which wasn't allowed. And then even worse, finding out that I wasn't even a student at the University of Toronto to begin with. So I ended up sitting out that game and I painfully watched the team lose. I'm pretty sure it was in triple overtime on a buzzer beater. So crazy. Aside from this, I was learning more and more about my interests through my positions at Front Row Ventures and at CIBC. So with my role at CIBC, it was getting more and more focused around insurance technology, or a similarly coined term to fintech, which is insurtech, right? And so I was in a research position that was figuring out trends in the space, dealing with things like regulations, creating presentations to communicate my findings and recommendation to the team. I was analyzing a lot of startups in the space. And at the same time with Front Row Ventures, we started actively looking at deals and getting our brand name out there in the startup ecosystem. So because I live downtown, I was super close to a lot of the startup pitch competitions and other networking events that were being hosted. So I attended a bunch of those. I got a chance to work with startups operating throughout a wide array of different industries, from AI to drug development to flying cars to smart buildings to some clean tech. It was all so new for me, and I was learning so much. And so through this, my interest for startups grew more and more. And it was crazy how these other students were creating startups that could impact the world. And so more specifically, I became more and more interested in technology surrounding the environment, sustainable energy, and medical devices. So for the fall term, I was living downtown with my best friend, working with an amazing team at a great office environment for my co-op at CIBC. I also had an amazing manager. If she's listening right now, Joanna, shout out to you as well. Amazing manager, great team. I had a great group of friends that I could hang out in the city with or play basketball with. Every week I had 3 or 4 basketball games to play. If I wasn't playing basketball, I was having fun in the city, partying, going to clubs, eating good food. It was just a super fun term. And little did I know my next term on exchange was going to be, even better. So that winter break I spent at home. At the university I was going to in Singapore, the winter semester was starting a bit later in January. So I had some extra time in between semesters, but I only spent probably 6 days in Vancouver, spending Christmas with the family before packing my bags and flying to Taiwan to hang out with my grandparents, my dad, my cousins, who all live there. Now, usually I would never get the opportunity to fly to Taiwan in between semesters. The breaks were just too short, but this exchange term in Singapore gave me the perfect opportunity. Taiwan to Singapore is just a 4-hour flight. I could spend 2 weeks in Taiwan before flying to Singapore. Better yet, there was no time difference between the two, so I could adjust the jet lag as well. Now, Taiwan is always so fun. Going to karaoke, eating good food, shopping at the malls, going to the night markets. I can never get tired of that. Now, and I stayed in Taiwan until about 2 days before classes officially started. And when I first landed in Singapore, I had absolutely no idea what to expect. It kind of felt like starting university all over again, and I was feeling some of the emotions I felt when I first arrived at Waterloo. I didn't know anybody. I had no friends. I didn't know the area. I didn't understand the culture. The biggest worry on my mind was I've got to make some friends. I think this is where the biggest difference was between the first year of university and starting my exchange term, right? 2 years have passed and I've grown a lot since 2017, or 3 years have passed. I've grown a lot since 2017. I understand myself better. I understand my values and the type of friends that I gel best with. So it's a lot easier to make friends that way, or at least it's a lot easier to put yourself in the situation where you get to meet the type of people you like to hang out with. And I remember back in the first few weeks of university, I was just trying to go to every single event possible, join every club possible, because, I was trying to meet as many people as I possibly could. And I will admit, I was quite scared that I had missed the window of opportunity to make friends, because most of the exchange students showed up way earlier in January, and there were a few exchanger events hosted by the university that I had missed already because I opted to stay in Taiwan a bit longer. But it turned out okay. Actually, way better than okay. It was probably the best time of my life. I know you guys are probably sick and tired of me talking about Singapore, but truly it was so fun. And luckily, one of my best friends ended up being my roommate, and he lived literally right next to me. He had a solid group of friends and was super nice and integrated me into the group. And throughout the term, I made a bunch of friends as well, and even made a solid group of friends from a different university in downtown Singapore, SMU, Singapore Management University. And to be honest, I really didn't spend any time on academics. All my courses were pass or fail. As long as I got above a 50, I'd get the credit. And this is the way I wanted things to be anyways. I didn't want to travel to Singapore and be cooped up in a library all the time, cramming for exams. I do enough of that already when I'm in Waterloo. But, working out in basketball in Singapore was also a great way to meet friends. I met a lot of buddies through basketball and working out in Singapore as well. I really love the cultural environment in Singapore. They really, really bleed school spirit. So they have a lot of different residences for students to live in on campus, like tons, like probably 10 or more. And so they always have these like inter-college or inter-residence games where it's pretty much like a mini Olympics. You got basketball, you've got, different sort of sports, and each residence has their own team. And so they would compete against one another for, the championship or whatever. And so I got lucky a few times. Unfortunately, my residence didn't have a team, but I was fortunate enough to scrimmage one time with one of my friends who let me, play against the practice team. But yeah, basketball and working out, like those two things are always a constant pillar in my life that enable me to meet new friends. So it was always great. Now, back to my adventures in Singapore, they were unreal. From, nights out at the club, all you can drink at a liquid buffet, budget trips to Vietnam and Malaysia, the amazing food, the pool parties, the intense chess games, and all the deep talks I had with my friends. I loved every single moment of it. And this was the first time I honestly really ever felt I was enjoying myself in university. My friends, they taught me how to have fun, and I've made relationships with people on this trip that I will never forget. To be honest, I could spend hours talking about my trip and all the crazy details of some of our adventures, but I will save that for later. Now, when coronavirus started hitting the world hard, many of my friends started getting recalled home almost 2 months earlier than when they were supposed to leave Singapore. And even when most of my friends left, I still stayed for an extra month, and it was a crazy contrast. During the first few weeks of when my friends were about to leave, we were going all out, and I mean all out. We had itineraries planned for what we wanted to do every single day, as if we were literally on vacation in Singapore. The day was just packed and filled with activities from morning to night, right? And the thought process was, everybody is going to be leaving in a week or so anyways. We can study when we leave each other. So it was so fun. One of our friends got a room at the Marina Bay Sands. She let us all go in and check out the pool and the room. We pretty much did all the touristy things you could possibly do in Singapore. And so, I still had a solid group of friends that lived downtown that I hung out with. But at that time, Singapore started shutting down the city too. Businesses started closing, malls closed, nightclubs closed, and we could only stay in our room and leave to go and get food. So we were limited in that sense. But, now I sit here back home in Vancouver, fresh out of a 2-week mandatory quarantine, and I can say that I think I know a bit more about myself now. In terms of my interests and passions, I'm really interested in sustainable energy, startups, medical devices, and health technology. Now I'm on a mission to learn the skills I need to educate myself more in these spaces so I can contribute and deliver value to them. I'm not sure how I'll do that yet, but hopefully the next year will be filled with just as much growth and learnings. On the other hand, I think out of everything that's happened in 2020, I've learned to take life a bit easier. There's no need for a constant search for purpose. Life is so fragile. Just spend it with your family and friends and you'll be okay. When I think back to Singapore, it wasn't really the places we went to that brought me the most joy. It was the people I was with. One of my friends said this when we were chilling all together, but we could have been on a remote island in the middle of nowhere, and I still would have had the same experience. Because at the end of the day, we're social beings, and it's through these relationships with our friends and family, and especially ourselves, that allow us to unlock true fulfillment. So here's to another amazing year. The Broaden Your Perspective podcast is meant to be a platform for anybody who has a story to share. If you want to come on the podcast for an episode to talk about your journey and experiences, feel free to reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or by email. Thank you for tuning in for another episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a rating or review on whatever platform you're listening through. I would greatly appreciate that. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Jonny_Hsu. That's JONNY_HSU, and to follow the Broaden Your Perspective podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Instagram, and Facebook.